the Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. Okay, quick trivia time. Was there figure skating in the Summer Games? Yes, it really happened, but it's also a bit of a trick question. In the early days of the modern Olympics, there were only the Summer Games, not a full separate event for winter sports. So, in the 1908 Games and the 1920 Games, figure skating was part of the overall Olympic program. Then, in 1924, the IOC held a so-called International Winter Sports Week in the French Alps that featured figure skating. That Winter Sports Week was later recognized as the first Olympic Winter Games, setting a tradition of separating cold weather and warm weather sports. MassMutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a MassMutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
MotoGP's second summer break has been pretty quiet for the rider market so far, but is that going to change before racing resumes? That is the theme of the Race MotoGP podcast this week, where we're looking at the remaining jigsaw pieces that are about to fall into place, and also which riders are going to fall off that jigsaw entirely and become discarded spare pieces on the floor replaced by different pieces, which isn't really how jigsaws work, but for the sake of this analogy, I'm just going to stick with it. I'm Matt Beer, and joining me, we have a slightly different lineup. Simon Patterson is here as usual, and we've got Lewis Duncan with us, a good friend of all of ours here, and we had actually booked him in as a wildcard guest for this podcast, but then Val Horinci, the usual part of our trio, we lent him to Formula One again for the Hungarian Grand Prix last weekend, and due to kind of crowd strike hangover, I think is the best way to put it. He has not yet managed to get off an aeroplane, basically.
Let's just call it what it is, Matt. It's Val's usual travel planning.
This is worse than usual.
It happens, but it happens every time Val goes to a race.
Yeah, it normally involves a bus or him leaving his passport on a tram or something. This is actually a genuine global issue. I
mean, I made it to London and back at the weekend with cancelled flights to do commentary for the Suzuki 8 Hours, so he's got no excuse.
Yeah, right. And he's not here to defend himself. He's currently on... No,
and he's not here to defend himself.
He's currently either on a plane or in Budapest airport, so fine. Anyway, so we invited Lewis along as a wild card, and then in Val's absence, this is the case of a wild card rider being called up to the main team after all, because there's not 2 bikes on the grid. So Lewis, thank you very much for joining us and being promoted to the usual Val slot.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be back. It's sort of a weird one, because obviously me and Simon have known each other for years and never been on a podcast, and obviously Matt, we know each other from years ago, and it's just kind of like old times. It's nice.
Yeah, it feels really nostalgic already. The only thing I was sad about with Val not here, I was hoping for the whole spread of regional accents, because obviously Simon representing the Republic of Ireland, Lewis representing Scotland, and Val being so Welsh. I just thought we've got the entire UK and Ireland, with me being a sort of slightly whiny voiced Southwest. We've got the whole spread, but we'll have to wait for your next wildcard appearance for that. Anyway, I have an opening question for you guys. We know that there'll be at least one current rider exiting the MotoGP field because Aleix Espargaro is retiring. We know there'll be at least one new addition because Fermin Aldeguer was signed a long time ago. And Simon, you get a chance to go on about Aldeguer without Val here to disagree with you tonight. So we look forward to that. But opening question for Lewis, who I will call Val a few times in this podcast, and Simon. Taking aside Espargaro, how many other current MotoGP riders will not be on the 2025 grid full-time? Lewis, you get first go at the number because you're the guest.
And I hate to be kind of boring about it, but I think probably two of the kind of list of riders that we don't have hooked up to a seat yet. I think there's probably two likely candidates that will be looking for employment elsewhere.
See, the boring answer... No, actually, I'm going to let Simon go first. I don't think his will be the boring answer. Simon, what's your answer?
It might be boring because I think it's only one.
See, the really boring answer was 0, although given some of what's gone on at Tech 3 this year, I think actually 0 would be quite a gamble as an answer. But yes, so, Lewis, you've gone for 2. You can give first pick who you particularly certain will not be in the field next year.
Augusto Fernandez, as you mentioned there about Tech 3. I mean, it's, there is nowhere for him on the grid, and frankly, he hasn't done enough over the past 2 years to deserve an extended stay. Okay, it's been tough circumstances on the KTM, and we know how difficult that kind of environment can be on a rider, but like he's had enough chances, I think, and it's hard to kind of find a defence for him or a justification for him to be on the grid on another bike, on a better bike.
So the case with Fernandez as well, it's not like they're looking for someone to replace him. That is already done. KTM has gone shopping from across the rest of the grid, filled itself. Augusto's been talking for some months like this is basically him done in MotoGP. Where do you think he might end up? What is the hope for the rest of his career from here?
The competitive superbike ride, a la Xavi Vierge and Iker Lecuona. That's my, yeah.
And I think there's enough about Fernandez that we've seen that although this hasn't worked out in MotoGP, well, I mean, last year was like a kind of positive aberration where he did a little bit better than expected for someone kind of thrust in because, yes, he had ended up doing really well in Moto2 in the end, but there wasn't the momentum behind him. There wasn't the here comes a superstar chat that we've got about Pedro Acosta. So I think the MotoGP career he's had, he's not made it to the podium. I can't see that changing in the remaining races, but was 4th place his peak last year?
Yeah, Le Mans.
Yeah. That and then getting a decent superbike seat would seem fair. I
mean, the kind of the role model for the rest of his career at this point should be Remy Gardner, because Remy's kind of had Remy has done what you'd expect Augusto to do. Started a semi decent superbike team, take a bit of time to get used to a very different riding style, make a bit of a name for yourself, and probably be in line for a factory seat whenever it comes to reshuffling their rider lineup there. If we're talking in 2 years' time, in a year's time, about Remy being the replacement for Jonathan Rea, factory Yamaha, no surprises whatsoever about that. So,
I mean, Remy has been back on the MotoGP grid as well with Yamaha, and it'll be twice because he's standing in for Cal Crutchlow as the wildcard at Silverstone as well. When someone like Fernandez now and like Gardner then drops out of MotoGP at the age, but also in the circumstances, they're young, but their MotoGP career hasn't worked, basically. They've kind of crashed and burned pretty quickly. Do you think people like Fernandez now see a way back into MotoGP via superbikes, or is that just will he be happy to just make a solid career somewhere else from here?
I think that avenue is kind of long dead, really. I think it died with people like Cal Crutchlow. The MotoGP bike now is just so far removed from a superbike. All this talk about Toprak, Razgatlioglu maybe coming over, it just wouldn't. I don't think it would work. There's just, the bikes now in MotoGP are so competitive. The grid is so competitive. No rider has time, and that's fundamentally the problem that Augusto's faced. Is that he just hasn't been given a chance. There isn't enough time to give these young riders time. Didier Antonio is quite a good example of a rider really being thrust to the edge of kind of demolition there for their really young career, and then if you just give them that little bit of space, give time, good things can happen. There isn't time now in MotoGP for that to happen, and I think someone like Fernandez just has to accept that competitive superbike ride, and then maybe the odd wild card, maybe test ride and whatever in MotoGP is kind of that's where that story will go in terms of Grand Prix racing for them.
The unfortunate thing for Gusto is that I don't think he's any worse than kind of Alex Marquez or, you know, those other those other guys who've taken a long time to be competitive in Moto2, who've come into MotoGP and, you know, unfortunately for Gusto, who've been on a considerably better bike and have delivered at least some results relatively quickly on it. Both of those guys are race winners. If he were on a Ducati, based on some of the flashes of performance we've seen from him on a much, much worse KTM as a rookie, I have no doubt whatsoever he'd be challenging for the occasional race win on a Ducati. You know, if he could finish fourth in the KTM in tricky conditions in Le Mans, he could have won that race in a Ducati. Yeah, that's the margin there. So in a way, it's kind of, I feel a little bit hard done by for him, because I think to come into a lesser factory and make it work and build a career for yourself long term, you kind of have to be the next, the next Acosta. You have to be something really special, otherwise you're going to struggle. At least under for the next 2 years, and then we'll see what happens, because obviously everything's going to go absolutely insane at the end of 26 whenever everyone has new bikes.
Yeah, we won't do the 2027 rider market yet. Maybe
let's leave that a week or two.
Yeah, I was going to say October.
Yeah.
But that's fine. Speaking of Digia, that is a really interesting one, because when I was making the list for this episode, not a couple of months ago, 6 months ago, I would have gone for a Larry bet on Digia being off the grid after this season. I know he ended 2023 so well with Grassini, but a big part of me was thinking, not that was a fluke, but was that a circumstance of everything, sorted bike, good crew chief, his confidence, other people being a bit distracted by title fights and stuff? Was that just a little bit of a one-off? Could he sustain it? Or would he, and with the move to VR46, where he wasn't exactly, not wanted might be too extreme, but he was a bit of a fish out of water in the Valentino Rossi setup there. Instead, we're just waiting basically any day now for VR46 to go, yep, Digia signed with us long term. So he now... Lewis, you've been nodding throughout this, so I'm going to let you dive straight in with verbal agreement too, because the nodding is not really making a strong noise. He now seems a shoo-in for not just next season, but a very decent MotoGP future from here.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was just saying a moment ago, is if you kind of give these guys... Digia is a great example of, if you give these riders, these young riders, a bit of time, there's good things can happen. Frankie Carcetti is a great crew chief, and I think that's really been key to Digia's success there. And you look at Digia this year in the GP23, you look at Bez, for example. Bez, I think we all expected him to just absolutely wipe the floor in that VR46 organisation, be a title contender. And, Digia's made him look a bit kind of almost undeserving of that factory Aprilia seat. With all due respect to Bez, Digia's done a really good job, and the fact that there's only one factory kind of satellite bike now going for next year, Digia more than has earned that seat, and I think VR46 should deserve a bit of credit for sticking by him as well. It would have been easy to chuck him out, stick Frankie on the bike for next year when something like that to save one of their own guys. They've put their faith in Digia, and I think it's a nice kind of underdog story, that one.
For me, you hit the nail on the head, Lewis. The other part of the Digia story is that you have to give rookies a good structure to work with them, because they put him in with a rookie crew chief. It was an absolute disaster. He, if he hadn't been in a 2-year deal at the beginning, he would have washed out after one season because it was really disappointing. Then he found himself with Frankie Carcetti, and lo and behold, there's talent there.
Yeah,
but they had to work to find it. Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't always the resource or the opportunity to do something like that. Although with the with the list of crew chiefs that Ducati has, that's even more stacked than the riders that they have no excuse not for putting these guys with super experienced crew chiefs. But yeah, he got lucky in a lot of regards, because there's things beyond talent that's out of his control. And he's lucky he got the opportunity that all those things fell at the right time for him in the right way, because he wouldn't have won races last year without Carcetti.
Yeah, I remember speaking to Carcetti in Valencia last year, and he told me that he came in and just they had to completely change kind of everything about what Digi was doing to kind of go a bit more in the direction of the other Ducatis, because it was so far away from what the rest were doing. And I think people just assume you can jump on a Ducati and be quick straight away, but it doesn't seem like there's that much wiggle room in terms of what you can do with setup for it to be competitive. You kind of have to go in a fairly structured way with, you know, the rest of the stable to kind of get the best out of it. And yeah, I mean, it's almost a shame Carcetti hasn't kind of been promoted up to the factory team alongside Mark, because I think he's deserving of that. You know, I know we're talking about riders here, but big up Frankie Carcetti.
But one of the reasons we're talking about riders who won't be in the grid next year is because one of those spots has been taken by Fermin Aldeguer, and there's every possibility he's going to land with Frankie Carcetti, and what a year one education that's going to be.
Well, let's do Aldeguer Corner. So one of the questions, we have a few questions from the Race Members Club, which you can now access via Patreon. There's a riders only tier. If you just want the two-wheeled stuff, you can get that exclusively and not have all the car racing stuff. That's £3 plus VAT per month. You get a couple of bonus podcasts per month at least. For that, you get the chance to quiz us on various topics to get your questions featured in this podcast, including this one. John Ipp, after the last race, said, "What does Simon not see in Aldeguer?" Now, I'm going to paraphrase Val, who's not here, and just go, Aldeguer's amazing. Val would be so much more analytical and grown up than that, and he'll hate that I've just done that. But Val has been an Aldeguer fan for some time. Not fan, he always tells me off for that as well. Aldeguer advocate for some time. He's like haunting this episode, even though he's on a plane. The question was to Simon, so I'm going to get your take first. So obviously Aldeguer is guaranteed a Ducati MotoGP seat, where you're expecting it will now probably be the Grassini space.
Yeah, I think so.
That has been occupied by Marc
Marquez's. Yeah.
What do you not see in Aldeguer, Simon?
Sorry,
that's not, John. If I haven't given the name, that was John Ipp from the Members Club asked you that. What do you not see in Aldeguer?
It's not that that there's something that I don't see per se. It's that I've traditionally never put great stake in performance of riders whenever they deliver a very intense, very strong burst of performance and then don't necessarily follow up on it. And I think that so far is what we've seen from Aldeguer. I had my suspicions at the end of last season whenever he was winning that it was because the speed up bike was a lot better than we thought it was. We've come into this season and the speed up bike has consistently had, Luca Boscoscaro's team have consistently had 4 bikes in the top 5. That's been a regular thing, but all too often the 4th of those bikes this year has been Aldeguer, both in practice and in races. He's been arguably, the weakest consistent contender out of their quartet, even if he has, absolutely won races. But I mean, ranked versus Sergio Garcia this year on the same machine, he's not doing a Garcia job. And I think that's what it is. There are other riders that you look back on, and I've seen them do something similar for a very short period of time. But where's Lorenzo Baldassarri now? He's just been sacked by his World Supersport team midway through the season. And he had one of those starts to the season that, that rivals the end of the season that Aldeguer had last year. Celestino Vietti is another example of someone who came in and looked like the next big thing for 2 months and then just hasn't matched it up again. And I think that's my worry. It's that it's been so, his period of being very fast has been very short-lived. And I don't know if it's truly indicative of his level as, he's obviously very good. He's obviously going to go to MotoGP and be good, but he is not the next Pedro Acosta. He isn't even close to it. I don't think he's even the next Pecco Bagnaia.
Not even double, probably triple champion Pecco Bagnaia. What an underachiever for not being Pecco Bagnaia.
That sounds terribly mean. But I think
to judge a rookie, not even Pecco
Pedro
Bagnaia.
Pedro Acosta is going to be the next big thing. He's going to be the next game changer in this sport. Yeah. I think everyone's pretty much. I think even Pecco would be in agreement on that Acosta is going to be the next big thing. He's still going to try really hard to beat him and thinks he can.
Yeah.
Because that's motorbike racing, but you know what I mean.
Lewis, for the sake of this podcast reputation, it's now your turn to disagree with Simon about Fermin Aldeguer.
I think I'll actually be a bit more harsh on Aldeguer because I don't.
Okay, that's still disagreement. I'll take it.
I don't. The problem, I see a couple of things with Aldeguer. The first one of them is that with the way the rider market works now, and everything moving so early, all these factory contracts being signed pre-season, right at the start of season, stuff like that. It's a very small window of opportunity that, it's like a small sample that manufacturers and teams are looking at for being like, oh, that's the guy we need. That's the rider we need. It's the adage of you're only as good as your last race has really been kind of ramped up over the last sort of few years with the rider market because, as Simon points out, a little burst of speed, fine, is one thing, but over the stretch of a season, it's quite easy to forget the bad moments. And you look at some of Aldeguer's performances this year, screwing up the long lap penalty in Barcelona, which was unnecessary. It was unnecessary to get that penalty in the first place. Same thing happened in Assen when he's in positions to win races, and it's like you that's not good enough for you. People make mistakes, but not of someone of supposedly Aldeguer's caliber. The other thing with him, from the very get-go, people were being, he would do a flash of speed and people were like, he's going to MotoGP next year. I remember when he got that pole in, was it Argentina a couple of years ago, and everyone was like, he'll be on a Yamaha next year or whatever it was. And it's like, as soon as that happens, it almost just follows a rider through. They become marked, and people will not be convinced otherwise that they're not good enough for MotoGP. And I think Aldeguer could be good for MotoGP, but not right now.
I think part of that, it's a really good point, and I think part of it that I've never considered until now, but you just made me think about it, is that he has a very, very strong VIP fan club. And I think the fact that Aleix Espargaro and Jorge Martin have been telling everyone that he's going to make it to MotoGP has probably helped speed that up in people's minds that, he's going to be a MotoGP rider. Whereas there's no one out there lobbying for the Sergio Garcias of the world in the same way, or even the way that, David Alonso has been lobbied by other people in the MotoGP grid, like Marc Marquez. I think that we're seeing maybe a little bit of bias creeping in from the little Andorra mafia in their training camp, and maybe that has hindered him the same way that Alex Marquez was hindered for years by Marc Marquez telling everyone that Alex is faster than him.
Yeah, so Garcia and Alonso are both people that are going to crop up later in this podcast, so I'll hold off on those for a moment. But just on the Aldeguer front, I get everything you're saying, and I am not in the Val corner. I'm not Moto2 expert enough to be in the Val corner on this one. But at the same time, Aldeguer's career really stands out as unusual now in a couple of ways. He's still very young at 19. When was the last time someone went into a Moto2 season knowing, factually, absolutely knowing, fully announced, not just promised, but absolutely announced, complete fact, you are going into MotoGP next season? Can't.
Jorge Lorenzo?
Probably, yeah.
Sam Lowe's, maybe?
Sam Lowe's,
yeah,
right.
because he went to Gresini, didn't he?
That went well, didn't it?
He went to Gresini in a 3-year deal. Yeah, he only got 2 of the years, but it started well.
Yeah, he has no regrets about that now. I can't remember reading anything that he said about that was negative. Anyway.
But yeah, I think Lorenzo signed a MotoGP deal to be a rookie with Factory Yamaha in 2008, while still fighting for the 2006 250 title.
So this is really unusual. He's very young. He's already not done Moto3, so he's on a weird trajectory before that. Despite that, you mentioned the excitement over his Moto2 poles. I mean, they did come in his first full season he was doing that, having had a weird route up to that point. So there's obviously something really interesting there. But is this situation... It's not an easy mental one, sure. He's been a 19-year-old kid whose career is a little bit strange already, being hyped up to this extent. There's an awful lot to be judged on at a very young age at this point.
I mean, one thing I should say is that I'm really happy that he's come up with an unusual trajectory, because I think the Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP system doesn't work for everyone, and it especially doesn't work for kids that have a bit of a growth spurt at a young age and end up a bit taller than the average, because in the past that would have basically excluded you from being fast in Moto3 and put you out of Grand Prix racing. So I like now that there's a very clear path to go to European Moto2 if you're a bit bigger, do your apprenticeship there, and then come directly into Moto2. That's a good thing for the sport, because it's in the long run that's going to help develop the best talent to MotoGP. But yeah, there has got to be a mental pressure on it. There's no way in the world you can tell me that, being told that you're the next big thing doesn't impact how you go about your job. I know we're making another Pedro Acosta comparison here, but I think Pedro Acosta's team is very fortunate in that he's got ice water in his veins and just nothing registers on the Pedro scale about pressure. At least from what we see, it just doesn't flicker the needle in his dial. But not everyone's like that. And it could well be that coming into this year, knowing he had a MotoGP contract in place for next year has been as much of a hindrance as it has a help.
I think that's a fair point. And the one thing I'd want to add to that as well is that the way this season has gone as well, where it started and it was all kind of guaranteed it'll be a GP25 at Pramac. It wasn't announced that way, but it's sort of that's the way it was heading. Now everything that then happened with Ducati is kind of really muddled up that picture. So now he's kind of not really been sure where he's going to be placed. Now it looks like he's not going to be on a factory bike if Ducati goes ahead with its 3 factory bike plan. And the other thing hanging over him, and this might sound a little bit odd, but he's a factory contracted rider who won't be on a factory bike and is going to be paid comparative peanuts for it. The contract is, I think it's something maybe 300,000 euros, which is, if someone paid me 300,000 euros to do a job, great, fantastic, I'm not going to complain. But for a MotoGP rider, that's really, really poor.
It's probably the lowest paid factory contract there's ever been in the modern era.
So all those things, you think you're kind of being touted as really, really hot stuff, but like the circumstances for you coming up to MotoGP and the situation you find yourself in doesn't really speak to that, which for a 19-year-old full of ego and all the rest of it, that must really, really knock your confidence and really, really take you down a peg. And when you've got, like Simon says, people like Aleix, people like Martin really hyping you up, you must be sat there thinking, well, why am I not, why is nobody else doing that? Why am I not in a better position? Why am I not? And then that must feed into your race and on-track stuff. And then, and then we see these silly mistakes.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
We love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Simon, you guessed one other rider would be squeezed off the grid. I'm thinking you were also thinking of Augusto Fernandez.
I was. Augusto was I think I might have an idea who Lewis's second one is, and I toyed with the idea. Is it Taka Nakagami?
It's not actually.
Oh, okay.
Whoa.
Well, then before we go to that, let me make why I toyed with Taka. Essentially, we there are perennial rumors of Taka being replaced. Every time we get to contract season, Taka's going to be replaced. That's just that happens every year now, and yet Taka is still there. partly because of, kind of Aldeguer's stubbornness to not be a Honda rider. And partly because I think Taka actually does a fairly good job in terms of making a bad bike all right. And, if anything, Honda should be looking at the Taka or the Honda results this year minus Marc Marquez and realizing that, a good Taka weekend now leaves him top Honda. That he is, arguably as competitive as Joan Mir and Johan Zarco, and considerably more competitive than Luca Marini on most occasions. So I think there's, maybe Aldeguer has played his cards a little bit too loosely over the past years, turning down an opportunity when it was there, hoping that the bike got better, and has now found himself in a position where actually Taka is doing a decent job and there might not be a space for Aldeguer. And obviously we know that seat Idemitsu sponsored is kind of reserved for, not for a Japanese rider, but for like a product of the Asia Talent Cup program, someone from the ranks, be it Indonesia, Thailand, maybe even Australia if the cards lined up right. But it's certainly going to go to one of those riders, one on that side of the world. If Aldeguer isn't, if they're not considering Aldeguer, there's no one else really right now. And yeah.
On that subject, we just have a couple of members called questions about Aldeguer, which is excellent timing for. Gordon said, can Aldeguer be told to go to MotoGP? It sounds like his contract situation is very strict, and I'll appreciate an explanation. And alongside that, Hayes, regular Members Club question submitter, thank you, Hayes, said, Aldeguer had a great race in Germany. He's looking more and more formidable in the Moto2 Championship. If he wants to move up to MotoGP, is he condemned to Honda? Still, every time we get a question or something where Honda sounds rubbish, I still think, condemned to Honda. What a phrase 7 years ago. I just wouldn't have thought it. It's like saying
all
only
those years,
as good as
all those
Bagnaia.
years that Taka was wasting a Honda.
Yeah, indeed. Or are there other options for Aldeguer? He no longer rides a Honda Team Asia. Wouldn't that free him up to be in the running for a seat at Pramac, Yamaha, or maybe Trackhouse? Trackhouse will crop up in this podcast in quite a big way later on. Two things there. Is Aldeguer's contract as strict as Honda could force him up if it wanted to? And does he have alternatives? Would a non-Honda MotoGP team be interested in Aldeguer at this point?
I think that his contract is certainly less loose this year than it has been in the past. There's a reason he wanted out of the Honda Team Asia setup and went to the MT Helmets team, and it wasn't to get off of Calix, because at the time Calix was the best bike in the grid. I think that he, I've heard all sorts of stories about what it's like inside that program and kind of the regimented routine that they're forced to follow away from race weekends as well as at them. You will wake up at 7:31, you will have breakfast at 7:34, you will be ready to go training at 8:04. So I think he wanted out of that. So I think he's maybe, Honda and him aren't the very, very close mutual relationship that they once were anymore. But he is still, Honda affiliated in ways. I mean, it's quite telling that he rides for a team sponsored by a helmet company and still wears a different brand of helmet. I think that's quite a hint that there's where the contract's weighted.
That should have been a differently written contract, surely.
Yeah, a little bit. So I don't think, I don't know. I don't know if Honda's the only option for him the way that it traditionally has been. I think if he has other options, or if he's interested in other options, he should really be having someone in his management team telling everyone that he's open to go to other teams, because there is this perception that he's a Honda company man through and through. But I would quite like to see him in a Ducati. I mean, it would be an interesting turn up for the books. We've seen things like this happen in the past. And let's not forget, there is still an open satellite seat for next year on a Yamaha.
Yeah, the thing with Aldeguer and non-Honda interest it's one of those situations. Agura is obviously a really interesting rider in a lot of ways. Like the season, he nearly won the Moto2 title. There's lots to admire in that. Although at the end, we've talked about Augusto Fernandez already, and the end of the 2022 season was Fernandez and Agura seeing who could fall down some stairs fastest and end up with a championship at the end of it. It was a little bit shambolic on both parts, and Agura came out second best. It's the sort of thing where he hasn't actually looked stunning enough that another team was thinking, we need to spend a fortune buying Honda out of this contract. And if he doesn't end up with a Honda seat, everyone else can look at that and go, well, Honda didn't want him, so no point in us looking. So he's I feel like he's a little bit stuck there. But see what happens if he actually wins this title. It's not, it'll be his fourth season in Moto2, which isn't horrendous, really, is it? Other people rise through quicker, but other people, and we might talk about one of them later as well, take a bit longer to get up to speed there. But yeah, so it's not Nakagami that is being kicked off the grid by Lewis. Who is being kicked out of MotoGP?
I've kind of gone back and forward, but obviously with the kind of rumours of what's going on at Trackhouse, it kind of rules out Jack Miller for me. But the rider, I think, is probably going to be maybe unfortunately find himself, or is more likely to find himself kind of unfortunately without a seat when the music stops, is Morbidelli.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Obviously the people kind of assumed it's like, well, he's a Pramac and they're going to Yamaha. He's already been like, I really don't want to go to Yamaha. Yes, maybe VR46, but it's kind of hard to sort of see what's going on at those two satellite Ducati teams right now, because if obviously they have some sort of independence, but if Ducati was heavy enough on them to be like, we want, this rider, for example, they're going to struggle to say no. And yeah, I feel like just the way things have been going as well, as Morbidelli is just going to kind of unfortunately come off quite a big loser out of all this. I hope that's not the case. I like Franco a lot as a rider, but yeah, I fear that he might find himself kind of an unlucky victim in all of this.
I think the opposite. I think he's pretty safe. I think that there's really no other real standout candidate for the second VR46 seat at the minute that I can see. I think that Frankie is, he is the academy. He is the guy in the academy that's closer to Valentino Rossi than anyone else. He's the guy that kind of, led the way in terms of building that whole structure. And I think given that they've put in all the work making him good again, I think that they're not going to try and chop him just as he is getting good again. I think it's been 3 long years of slog to get him back to being a podium contender, and they're going to look at him and think, we really want this guy for next year, because there is not going to be another VR46 title challenge like there was with Marco Bezzecchi last year. I think that those days are past from quite a number of the grid, to be honest. I think we're going to get back into a bit of an era of factory bikes fighting for titles and satellite bikes fighting for race wins for a few years after all the dust has settled for this year. And I think he's as good a contender as any for that.
So, again, a little bit like Digia, but more recently, a few months ago, I probably wouldn't have said Morbidelli's out of a ride, because that Rossi thing, I think Valentino Rossi and VR46 would have saved him if it was at all possible. And that, I mean possible in terms of both having a space and Morbidelli looking good enough. Because for most of these last few years, Morbidelli has not looked good enough to be in MotoGP, full stop. We've talked a lot on the podcast about how maybe he was closer to Fabio Quartararo than the reputation suggested in the second part of their Yamaha factory time together. But overall, there were some huge performance disparities. We're saying Morbidelli deserves to be on next year's grid in large part because we look at the end of 2020 and go, well, that happened. That must be something from that time must be in there still somewhere. That said, it's sort of 5-6 race weekends now. It's kind of Le Mans onwards. He's looked fine, all right. Yeah. He hasn't sustained good. Yeah, good enough. A satellite. He's still on the GP24 though. He's still on what we often say on this podcast is the greatest racing motorcycle ever, and he is not doing what Bastianini, Bagnaia, or Martin are doing with it by some distance still. I forget he's on GP24 sometimes. I look at the results and go, he's where Digia is. He's ahead of Bears. That's fine. It's not really fine. He's on the proper bike that everyone says is a big step up over last year's Ducati. It's good, but to me, this feels like a situation where, he landed at Pramac because lots of other jigsaw pieces got up upended in ways that didn't make much sense when you look at it on paper. Is he going to end up at VR46 because actually a lot of other people have left Ducati for Marquez-triggered reasons, and there's another kind of musical chairs default victory because he's good enough and a friend of Rossi's and is still there?
Yeah. I mean, people have got seats for worse reasons.
True. Yeah, true. Okay, and that's how Alex Marquez ended up on the Repsol Honda for a year. But,
well, exactly, by being good enough at the right time.
Yeah.
To be fair to Alex, though, he was actually pretty good that first year in the Honda, a lot better than I think we ever expected from him.
He was also the reigning Moto2 champion in November when they needed a rider. He was arguably the best rider available for, I'm not taking anything away from Alex. It was timing, nothing else, that kind of thrust him into that seat, but he was the best rider available.
Yeah, it's the timing, I suppose, a funny one, because Morbidelli's sort of promotion to the factory Yamaha team and kind of into the situation that really hit the skids on his career a bit was the timing of Maverick having his sort of implosion and nobody being kind of available, and obviously Frankie was injured at the time as well, so it was really it's funny how that all shapes out.
As we mentioned earlier in the episode, if you join the Race Members Club on Patreon or via the Race website, you get access to some MotoGP extras every month, a couple of bonus podcasts just for members, chance to quiz us and get your questions thrown into the podcast as well, chance to influence the future things we write and talk about. This week's MotoGP Extra is all about the all-female World WCR series that the FIM has set up for 2024 and the future, an attempt to kind of redress the balance of the male domination of motorcycle racing by giving young female riders this development series, or is it a destination in itself? That's part of the debate we had on this episode. I was joined by Simon, by Megan White, and by Val Horinci before he got on a plane to debate everything about WCR, the racing so far, what's right and wrong with it. Here's a little flavour of what we chatted about.
The one good thing I'll say, and I don't know how this applies to the four-wheel motorsport world because I'm not in it at all, but at a grassroots level, there are lots of young girls racing motorbikes. There really are. Whenever you look, there are far more than there are at the top level, at a grassroots level. And I wonder if the reason that we don't see more working up through the ranks is because there's never been a place for them, and because they have essentially been told by the system that there is no place for them.
Yeah.
And maybe by giving them a target, it's going to convert that bigger number of grassroots kids that we have at the minute competing in things like the Mini GP Championship. That's the first step in Dorna's road to MotoGP, in similar, pocket bike mini moto series across, various national championships and at regional level in Spain and Italy particularly. There are women there. We've given them something to strive for the first time. And hopefully now it's just a case of connecting those two dots.
That's a great point, Simon. I interviewed Aurora Angelucci, who founded Angelucci Talent Management. Probably that was in November, I think, and she was doing some amazing work across a lot of these smaller regional championships, getting, as you said, young women into racing at that level. And I think, in that respect, like you said, having somewhere to go, whether we think that it as the final destination is necessarily the right thing, having a destination that is a very clear destination for those young women, at least having somewhere to race, that's got to be positive. Getting that grid full of really good quality young talent. If they're quite, if they're 16, 17, 18, I'm not sure what the age limit is for WCR, but 18. So if they're 18 and they're coming into that championship at 18 at a really good level, a couple of years in that championship, there's no reason that they won't be able to, go elsewhere. So I think having it as an option, great.
This is essentially the first time ever that women have been told there is an opportunity to be a full-time professional motorcycle racer for you. There is now a place where you can get paid to race motorbikes.
As you'd expect, there is an hour full of forthright views from all of us, a few comparisons to what Formula One and car racing has done for female racers in recent years as well. Megan sharing some of her experiences she had when reporting on W Series earlier in her career. And we've got several guests in the episode as well. A couple of the riders from WCR giving their views on what the series has done for them so far, how they found it. An ex-MotoGP rider who's now rider coaching in WCR giving his view on the quality of racing and the quality of the talent. And a really good little interview with FIM president Jorge Viejas, who is one of the strongest advocates for the championship, explaining why he's taking it so seriously. And we get into a lot in that episode. Well worth listening to. Fully recommend anyone who fancies trying out the Members Club. The Riders tier on Patreon, just £3 plus VAT per month to just get the two-wheeled content we're doing on there. Let us know what you think of that episode and what else you want us to get into, because we're happy to delve into any part of two-wheeled racing over there. It's not just MotoGP. We do like giving you sort of behind the scenes little peeks from this podcast and the general operations of the race when we're chatting. And so, confession time. This podcast we expected might be on a slightly different topic before we recorded it, because we saw that the Trackhouse announcement was coming, and there were various reports that Trackhouse announcement would be Jack Miller. So we had a kind of Jack Miller themed podcast planned, which in some ways it's lucky we're not going ahead with that, because Val's not here to be the case of the defence, because it turns out Lewis feels much the same about Jack Miller as Simon, so this would be quite one-sided. And I'll have to quickly hype up my Jack Miller love to redress the balance. But let's talk Trackhouse, let's talk what's going on there. So briefly, because I think although Trackhouse made a big deal of this signing being a big announcement, it's keeping Raul Fernandez for 2 years. Yep, we saw that coming. Like, Fernandez was happy enough to stay. Trackhouse wanted him. Davide Brivio has been positive. Massimo Rivola has been very positive. Chairman
of the fan club, Massimo Rivola.
Yeah, I mean, Val says he's not a fan club, he's an advocate. I think Rivola was, said super fan of.
That was exact words.
Exact phrasing. Raul Fernandez super fan. Lewis, you can come in on this, because at this point in every Raul Fernandez conversation, I tend to go, why? He hasn't sustained a single performance beyond flashes in MotoGP. Where do you stand on Raul Fernandez? Does he deserve this 2-year Trackhouse commitment?
I honestly hate this announcement. I think it's really, really. I'm sorry, it's uninspiring. It's not surprising, but like when you think that that Trackhouse team is kind of. Is a good project. It's still in its infancy, but we know what Trackhouse is capable of from its, exploits in NASCAR, for example. There's a lot of good riders kind of around about the, that kind of ecosystem that could be better options. Putting Raul on a 2-year contract is just... I'm not as good a MotoGP journalist as I think I am, because I just don't see in Raul Fernandez what other people see. If you look at, he was really hyped coming into MotoGP after Moto2, but if you look at that Moto2 year, and I'd say this with all due respect, it's got to be one of the weaker kind of crops that he went up against, and he lost out to Remy Gardner, and look how Remy Gardner's career kind of transpired in MotoGP. I don't think Raul was ever really top grade MotoGP quality to begin with, and the fact he kind of clung on longer than someone like Gardner did, because as far as I was concerned, they were kind of much of a muchness. If you were going to put your money on someone, I'd probably put my money on Remy over Raul. Okay, you can argue, well, he's not been on the 2024 bike, fine, but the 2023 Aprilia is a very good bike. In some ways, it kind of looks like it's a better bike than the 24, and he's not, like you say, he's not really done that many good things. Barcelona was a good, a good flashpoint, but other than that, 2 years really for that? It's just... And if it goes the way we think it's going to go and someone like Joe Roberts misses out, then that's just such a bad look for MotoGP.
I disagree so much, Liz. I disagree so much. And for the same reason that I was shaking my head whenever you were comparing him to Remy. And it's time. Raul Fernandez had the most successful Moto2 season of all time.
Rookie season.
His only season. Whereas Remy and Joe have both taken, it took Joe Roberts 120 races to be in the podium back to back. And that for me is where people see the potential. It's the fact that he did it so quickly in Moto2 and then became the latest person to be absolutely broken by KTM in a way that only KTM can do with their riders. And Aprilia are kind of, Aprilia have kind of went from being worse than KTM at that to being the anti-KTM, where there's a bit of loyalty in developing talent. And, we talked about this earlier, Matt, didn't we, as a story pitch for the coming weeks about how Aprilia have kind of become this like home for lost souls and have rehabilitated them. They turned around Maverick Vinales' career. They took in Raul
big
Fernandez.
Wobbly hands gesture from Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, they took him from being a guy who could win races occasionally to being a guy who
win races occasionally,
tried to destroy a bike to being a guy who could win races occasionally again. They just took him back to his previous level. But I think that with both Raul and Miguel Oliveira, to an extent, they kind of took in people who had been washed out by other projects in MotoGP and have shown them a bit of loyalty to try and get them to where they think they should be. And obviously Aprilia see that where Raul should be is considerably higher than where he is right now. Riva keeps making references to, if you could see what I can see in the data. I think they must have something that they see in him that we maybe haven't had a chance to yet. I don't know if he would have deserved a 2-year deal, but he absolutely deserves a deal over Joe Roberts for me, because that goes back to the previous conversation of short, intense bursts of form that take a long time to get to.
Can I hypothesize a particular reason why Aprilia, the thing that Aprilia sees in Raul? And it's simply... It's
because they really want to sign out Adrian Fernandez in the future. So they keep him sweet.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Simon. I hate that you read my mind. For me, and this might be sort of minimising things, obviously Aprilia absolutely busted its budget on getting Martin, and therefore it's kind of had to go from shopping in Tesco to shopping in Lidl. It's had to make some cutback somewhere, and Raul Fernandez wasn't going anywhere. He's not gonna, you throw him a cheap contract, he's not gonna say no. So it's I kind of think Raul's kind of just... Aprilia have got him because they couldn't really afford anyone better. And
Joe Roberts would be cheaper, surely.
Yeah.
Joe Roberts would come with more money because there would be more opportunity, to shop around an American rider for an American team, in American markets. I think if that was the way it was going to be, I would go in that direction, because maybe talent-wise, maybe Raul has a little bit more than Joe, but from a purely kind of commercial factor, you're going to go for the American, the red-blooded Californian on a red, white, and blue bike. Surely that's better for your kind of image than, a rider who kind of is really hyped but has just flown so far below where he should be.
I think if they took Roberts because of his passport, they'd end up in a very cynical position very quickly, where he wouldn't perform to the level of the other Aprilias, the way that I think Fernandez is at least capable of doing right now. At least he's matching Oliveira. I think Roberts would be considerably further back, and I think there would be an element of passport cynicism from the paying public in him having a ride there.
To be fair, there would be passport cynicism for another Spanish rider having a contract.
The problem is it's hard to stop promoting Spanish riders whenever they're quite good. That is the fundamental problem.
The other element with the...
we just need to make Spain worse. We need to move Spain so that it's got worse weather or something, and make it rain a bit more often there so they can't go ride their bikes every Wednesday after school, and that'll do more for it than anything else.
The other element with the Roberts situation as well, we will be writing on the race at some point whenever it's obvious that Roberts is not getting that ride. I know we've got a few thoughts about that we'll share on the website as well, and we'll crop up in this podcast too. But it's one thing to say, let's get an American on the grid, that'll help. I think what we've seen from Formula One as well is actually, if America's going to get into something, it's not necessarily internationally because of the passport, unless that person is successful. The American explosion F1 interest is because they bought into the characters who were there already because they were marketed well, and that audience latched onto it. America's last 3 F1 drivers have done basically nothing, partly because of the machinery they've been in, but not entirely. They just haven't been good enough, and that's not driven any enthusiasm. Roberts failing in MotoGP, I don't think will be transformative for MotoGP in America. I know America has been short on MotoGP heroes since Nicky Hayden's time, but I don't think that's not the solution now. Getting more of America, and we're speaking to a converted audience. We get so many American listeners on this podcast, so many questions from America. So I understand there's a lot of people in America who do get what's special about MotoGP and then enjoying it along with us. But I don't think to convert the rest of America, I don't think you need a rider qualifying 21st all the time. That's not going to do it just because they're from California.
I think Val made the point earlier. Whenever he is haunting this podcast, isn't he?
He is, isn't he?
When
Things he said before he got on the plane are lodged in our heads.
Exactly. He made the point that Americans like winners. There's so much depth of talent in American sport at world level that they don't care about having a guy in the championship just because he's American. They want a guy in the championship because he's winning. And I think that doesn't apply to our massive MotoGP fan base that we've already got, our podcast listeners. But at the end of the day, they aren't the people that Trackhouse need to appeal to grow the sport in America. They're the people that are already here. And I think that, what Val said there, actually, there's a big element of truth to it.
I'll because those are all good points. I will happily concede that you have made a convincing argument. I still think Ralph Fernandez is a rubbish signing, but I do take your points about Joe Rogan, and it's a fair enough kind of thing. And you said Americans want winners. That's fair. You look at like a lot of I'm a big hockey fan. You look at a lot of those American teams. It's all Canadian players, and they don't care particularly about the passport. You're 100% correct. But yeah, I think Fernandez is boring. They should sign someone a bit more interesting. But they don't have the money to do that. So
well, this is the next question.
I mean, they are. It sounds like they are going to sign Jack Miller, who has never once been described as boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lewis is making a face that I completely agree with because I know why he's making it. But
Val, get off the plane. We need you.
No, but people go, I've had this conversation before, and people are like, Jack, he speaks his mind, blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, yeah, but like a lot of people speak their mind, and that's not always a good thing. Some people should not speak their mind, but I think people kind of compare Jack and Cal a bit too much, and it's like Cal shot from the hip, but Cal also had the kind of speed and the talent and the results to back it up. Jack has a lot of excuses when it comes to his kind of... He does. I'm sorry, he does. He has a lot of excuses where it's like, I'm really underrated, and then he goes and finishes 14th, and it's like, from lap 7, the front wheel was falling off, and it's like, well, that only seems to happen to you.
It took me a long time to realize this. This is going to be even less popular than what Lewis just said. Jack Miller is very outspoken at first glance, until you kind of listen to what he's saying, and then you realize that what he's saying is actually just the company line in quite a colourful way. And he actually, Crutchlow used his position and his platform as an outspoken character to do really good things around stuff like safety. Because he was always one of the guys that would call out the powers that be for doing, stupid things or for getting something wrong. Jack doesn't do that. Jack supports the company line with colourful language and the occasional abuse of certain journalists, myself included on occasion. But it's not... He's not outspoken in the proper sense of it whenever you actually listen to what he's saying when he says it.
Do you know who Jack reminds me of a little bit, and in a less fun way, is someone that says a lot without saying a lot? Dean Harrison. That's who Jack...
That's a niche road racing reference that has completely gone over Matt's head, but I like it. I like it.
It's like when Val talks about films.
That's what it's just. He says a lot without saying absolutely. He says nothing without and it's Jack as a rider. Just remove the kind of the personality thing. Okay, but he's a great development rider as Jack Miller, and I mean that with all due respect. Like, he is really, really good at that, and that's clear that the fact that GG entrusted him to be developing new parts for Ducati, even though he'd already signed a factory KTM deal, that says a lot about Jack. As a racer now, his results on a factory Ducati, underwhelming. His results on a factory KTM, really underwhelming. He's not done enough over the last sort of 3-4 years, to really genuinely warrant another good factory bike, albeit in a satellite team. To my mind, he's only ever, of his Grand Prix victories, only one of them was genuinely, you can be like, wow, that was a great ride. All the other ones were just circumstantial. Of course, you've got, he's won more races than me, and you've got to be in it to win it and all the rest of it. But you look at like Assen 2016, Mark had the pace to win that race. He just didn't, because it was like, well, I've got a championship. All my championship rivals are crashed out. Go ahead, Jack, do what you want. Jerez 21, he wasn't beating Fabio until Fabio's arm decided to break. And then Le Mans, that following race, was wet. Japan 2022 was genuinely the only ride in Jack Miller's MotoGP career you could go, wow, that was properly mega.
Aston 2016, Jack Miller in his second year MotoGP wins from 18th on the grid on a Mark VDS Honda.
And a red-flagged wet race.
Yeah, but you still that still takes something. This is my Jack Miller loyalty, my in Val's absence Jack Miller advocacy. Is there still I slate a lot of people in this podcast for showing flashes and not backing it up, and we'll talk about Miguel Oliveira in a second, and I'll do exactly that. There's something about Jack Miller's highs I just have more faith in, that there's something a bit more tangible there. We talk about Morbidelli being good enough. I think Jack Miller is absolutely good enough. I do think he crashes too much, he burns his tyres too much. I wish he could stop doing that, because that just makes him look substantially worse than he needs to look based on his actual pace. But that was a face, Simon. That was at me or at Maddie in the background.
No, it wasn't, sorry.
But, we talk about Miller getting the second Trackhouse seat. Fernandez is in the other one. So that would mean Miguel Oliveira is out of Trackhouse. Are we saying that Miller... You're giving the impression that Miller will be a downgrade in Oliveira with what you two guys are saying. Is that how you feel?
I think the reason that Oliveira won't be at Trackhouse next year is largely because of Miguel Oliveira off the bike rather than Miguel Oliveira on the bike. I think he hasn't done himself any favours with his some of his comments and some of his attitudes. And I think that he is the one that's actively pursuing a move elsewhere, because he seemingly feels slighted by Aprilia because they didn't sign him and instead signed the guy that fought for the championship last year to ride their factory bike. He has a chip on his shoulder. I don't think that's news to anyone. It shouldn't be. And I think that, he's looking for other opportunities, much in the same way that Jorge Martin ended up at Aprilia.
Lewis, you're nodding along on the Oliveira front as well.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, Oliveira's his own worst enemy. It's funny because I've sat there and slagged off Jack Miller, and I'm going to kind of defend Oliveira in the same way that you would defend Miller, is that Oliveira's kind of like good points are really, really good. We saw that on the KTM and kind of consistently as well. It's not quite worked on the Aprilia. But to be fair, he spent quite a lot of the time broken. I think if you're Trackhouse and Aprilia, I'd say Oliveira's a better bet than Miller. But also, if you're Oliveira and Yamaha's waving a factory contract in front of you that's probably got a little bit more money on top of it, and it's kind of a project that really does look like it's bearing a lot of really big potential, you kind of would tell Aprilia to shove it and say, okay, well, you could have kept me if you did this for me. I'm gonna go in the Yamaha and that's
I mean, I think Jack Miller has ended up being linked to Trackhouse because Miguel Oliveira doesn't want to ride a Trackhouse bike, and not because they think that Jack is the better contender for the seat.
So, assuming Oliveira is out of Trackhouse, Pramac Yamaha for him seems the obvious move. I don't think he's going to find his way onto a satellite Ducati, given the general congestion around satellite Ducatis. Who will Oliveira's teammate at Pramac be?
I'd send Sergio Garcia. He's looked like the most consistent of the Moto2 pack this year. He's gone about it in the right way, being, fairly level-headed, not being overly dramatic about how he's done things. There hasn't been many spectacular disasters. He hasn't crashed in the long lap loop. I think, he's kind of the quiet standout performer of that class this year. And, going back to what we talked about earlier, he's done it pretty quickly. He hasn't spent half a career in Moto2 trying to get to this point. He's been building here pretty much since he arrived in Moto2. And this is like this is, when you look at the trajectory, it makes sense he is where he is right now.
Yeah, he was on my list of, if we got to the end of the episode without mentioning Garcia, I was going to throw him in because we talked about Aldeguer, we talked about Joe Roberts, and the chances are right now, although the points are close, Garcia is going to beat them both to that Moto2 championship. Is he going to be one of those Moto2 champions who we're talking about in a couple of years' time, the way we talk about Augusto Fernandez now, or Remy Gardner, or possibly. One other person I want to throw in, and this is completely off the wall in terms of 2025 rider market, but we do wonder if maybe this is a 2026 question. We've talked a lot about riders who are just coming up with like some momentum, but not really convincing momentum. They're not on a Costa. They're going to be like as underwhelming as, for instance, a Bagnaia, to quote Simon. It's with your earlier comparison. One of the Members Club question, though, from Gordon was about David Alonso, and pointing out his Sachsenring weekend and race is hardly straightforward, and he still won. And Gordon asks, is Simon still unconvinced about Alonso's potential? I have to say, I can't remember when you slated Alonso, but I lose track of your slating. So,
I've never slated, I don't think, his potential. I've just thought that he wasn't ready for a MotoGP seat right now. Which I think maybe is what that's referring to. I don't think he's in line for a MotoGP seat next year, because I think we've learned that the Moto3 to MotoGP thing is not a successful route. See also Miller Jack. I think that he needs to go to Moto2. He will go to Moto2 next year, but he is someone who's on a path to be to go on and do good things for his career. I didn't realize this, but we were talking about this over the weekend with Liam Hodgkin that works for Dorna, because we were doing a bit of work together, and we got talking about him. And in his year and a half of Moto3 so far, he's on track this season to beat Romano Fenati's record for most Moto3 wins in a career.
Whoa.
Yeah, exactly. In a year and a half after Fenati, who spent like a decade and a half in Moto3. That was like they're like, oh yeah, he is actually really, really good. And if he's not riding a Red Bull IO KTM next year in Moto2, I'll eat someone's hat, because I think that's unless they try really hard to keep him within the Aspire structure, but he'll be on some sort of a KTM affiliated machine in Moto2 next year for sure.
Lewis, what are your David Alonso thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm quite. How do I phrase this without kind of getting the message across properly? I don't care about sort of junior series performances sort of individually, let's say in the same way that people get all kind of, such and such, that it was a great ride, and it's like one great ride. When it comes to junior series, I want to see guys dominate. I want to see what people like Pedro Acosta, because that's when you see, that says more to me than if you've got like a 5, 6, 7 rider championship battle. That said, in Moto3, that says to me that there's 5, 6, 7 guys who are all at the same level, not necessarily the best. And the way Alonso goes about races is just really special. There is just a bit of magic there. We saw that in his rookie season last year. I mean, winning 5 races in rookie season is insane, but the way he went about it, was it Silverstone, the first one that just really, there was just. Anyway, the way he goes about these races is just magic, and he's continued that this year. He's not let the hype kind of get to him. It's obviously been a little bit tougher, but like you just see those races, even those really tricky ones where there's loads of guys in there, Alonso just somehow effortlessly come through. And yeah, don't rush him. He's a gem. He's a great rider, and there's so much potential there. Don't rush him. Don't rush him in the same way that Aldeguer has been rushed. Exactly.
And like he is Alonso, the only other rider I can see coming through the junior ranks now that I think has any of the same level of potential is Colin Vigier. And it's for the same thing. It's because he's there whenever, he's there all the time. He's the guy that can kind of deal with the chaos in Moto3 and come out of it in a good position. I don't think there's anyone else that I look at in Moto2 either and say, oh, you're definitely a future MotoGP champion. Like those two are the guys that I think in 8 years are going to be fighting for championships on factory bikes.
And with Vigier as well, given how much the Netherlands has got excited about Formula One recently, I think I do like the idea of him doing well towards MotoGP, because that is a fan base with a classic venue already in the bag that is going to go absolutely nuts for one of its riders fighting atop MotoGP if it happens. It's a long way off yet.
Yes, but he's so different from like the Verstappen fan base that it's going to be fantastic if they try and latch onto him, because he's like, you know, even my Dutch friends, and I have a lot of them, think that he's quite not odd, but he's like Northern Netherlands farmer family. And he comes from a village of 6,000 people, and they're just incredibly down to earth and modest and calm. And no one's going to get excited inside the camp, regardless of how excited people are getting outside the camp, which is going to be quite amusing, I think.
I love the diversions that we've ended up on through this podcast, which started with a particularly loose structure of just, here's a bunch of riders I want to make sure we've talked about by the end of it who may or may not be out of rides. And they kept cropping up before I even needed to tick them off my list. So that was good. Race Members Club, as you've heard, a few people managed to throw their accusations straight at Simon in this episode. You can disagree with Simon on social media for free, and he may well argue back with you. But if you want a considered answer on a podcast, it's best to join the Members Club and abuse him politely via that. Lewis, thank you for being our wild card who got promoted. We will have you back as a wild card in the near future as well. Your opinions are quite vociferous, so you are definitely allowed to return.
Is Lewis like Michele Pirro from 2016 Misano, when he was signed up as a wild card and then and he concussed himself out of the race and suddenly he got moved down one garage onto the factory bike? That's basically your position here, isn't it?
I'll take that. I think that's just a compliment. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, the trouble with that comparison, though, it means in a few years' time there'll be a regulation that means we can't basically make any use of Lewis anymore. And Val's going to get a doping ban. And both of those sound a little bit like a headache for me as I've got to plan all this stuff. So on that note, thank you for your time and patience, listeners. We're back in your ears this time next week, looking ahead to the rest of the season as it prepares to kick off again with the British Grand Prix.
The Athletic.